My name is Clara Reynolds. I'm 28 years old, and today should have been the happiest day of my life. I stood in a white lace gown beside my new husband, Daniel Hayes, as we leaned over a three-tiered cake adorned with fresh magnolias. Our friends, his colleagues, and the entire Hayes family surrounded us with cheers, clapping as if their joy could echo through the old stone hall here in Asheville, North Carolina. I smiled for the camera, for Daniel, for the guests who had traveled hours just to be here. But inside, a hollow ache spread across my chest. Every time I glanced toward the front row on my side, the emptiness hit me like a stone. Not a single seat was filled by my family. No father to hand me a handkerchief when the vows made me cry, no mother to straighten my veil, no sister to squeeze my hand before the music began. Just vacant chairs, quietly accusing me. Daniel's hand brushed mine as we pressed the knife into the soft frosting. He leaned close, whispering so only I could hear, "You're doing amazing. They don't deserve this view of you." His words steadied me, if only for a heartbeat. I forced another smile as our guests erupted into laughter at the awkward way we fumbled with the silver knife. And then, my phone lit up in the hidden pocket of my gown. I hadn't planned to check it, but the vibration wouldn't stop. I discreetly pulled it free, the screen glaring up at me. One message from Mom. "We need to talk now." Below it, 32 missed calls, from her, from Dad, even from Lily. The knife in my hand suddenly felt too heavy. My stomach clenched as though the floor had shifted beneath me. Daniel noticed my face blanch. "What is it?" he murmured. I slipped the phone back into the pocket, pasting on another smile for the guests who were waiting for us to serve the first slice. "Later," I whispered, though my voice cracked around the word. As laughter swelled around us, I felt like I was standing outside my own wedding, peering through glass. Joy and sorrow tangled in my chest, my new family celebrating me, while the one I was born into reached for me with desperate hands I no longer trusted. I know what you're probably thinking. How could her family miss her wedding? Believe me, I've asked myself that 1,000 times. And if you've ever been betrayed by the very people who were supposed to love you unconditionally, then you already understand the pain lodged in my chest that night. Before I take you back to where this all began, do me a small favor. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and share it with someone who's ever felt invisible in their own family. It helps more than you know, and it keeps me brave enough to tell the truth all the way through. Because to explain why my family wasn't there, why my own mother and father chose another celebration over mine, you need to see the beginning of the fracture. I wasn't always the bride in white holding back tears. Once, I was a little girl in a suburban house in Madison, Wisconsin, with matching Christmas sweaters and carefully staged beach photos. From the outside, we looked like the kind of family Hallmark would have put on a card. But behind closed doors, I was already learning what it felt like to be the shadow. And that's where I need to take you next. Back to the start. Back to the girl who kept hoping that if she worked hard enough, someone in her family would finally see her. When I say I grew up in what looked like the perfect family, I mean it. If you drove down our quiet cul-de-sac in Madison, Wisconsin, you'd see a 2-story brick house with a trimmed lawn, a golden retriever chasing squirrels, and holiday lights strung neatly across the roof every December. From the sidewalk, you'd think we had it all together. Inside, though, it was a different story. My father, Edward Reynolds, worked long hours as an insurance manager, the kind of man who measured life in policies and premiums. My mother, Patricia, stayed home, always busy, organizing Lily's dance costumes, cooking dinners that looked like something out of Better Homes and Gardens, posting cheerful photos online. And then there was Lily, my little sister, 3 years younger, with blonde curls that bounced when she laughed, and a smile that seemed to light up entire rooms. Everyone adored her. Me? I was the quieter one, the girl who buried herself in books, experiments, and math puzzles. I wasn't jealous of Lily's sparkle. What broke me was how invisible I became in comparison. I still remember one spring evening in 10th grade. I came home clutching a thick envelope. "Mom!" I called, dropping my backpack by the door. "I got into the advanced science program. They only accepted a handful of students statewide." My heart was pounding with pride. She glanced up from the living room floor, where she was pinning sequins onto Lily's ballet tutu. "That's nice, honey. Put the letter on the counter so your dad can read it later." That was it. No hug, no phone call to Dad. Just a passing comment as if I'd told her I'd taken out the trash. 3 days later, Lily placed third in a small regional dance competition. That night, my parents took us all out for Italian. Dad ordered champagne for himself and Mom, raising his glass. "To our little star!" Everyone clapped. I pushed spaghetti around my plate, feeling like I'd been erased. At school, teachers praised me. I collected ribbons from science fairs and certificates with embossed seals. But at home, those achievements might as well have been invisible ink. The fridge door was plastered with Lily's recital posters, while my awards sat in a shoebox under my bed. I'd whisper to myself late at night, maybe if I work harder, maybe if I win something big enough, they'll notice me. But the truth was, it didn't matter how brightly I tried to shine. My light would always be dimmed next to Lily's stage glow. The worst sting came my senior year, graduation day. I scanned the bleachers, clutching my diploma, searching for my parents' faces, but they weren't there. Later, Mom told me, "You understand, right? Lily had her recital. That was really important for her future." I nodded, because that's what I always did. I understood. I swallowed the lump in my throat and pretended it was fine, even as tears burned behind my eyes. The audience clapped for someone else's child, and I stood alone, diploma in hand, trying to convince myself I didn't care. But deep down I did. God, I cared more than anything. Looking back, that's when something in me shifted. I stopped trying so hard to be seen at home. I poured myself into school, into friendships, into any place that didn't measure my worth against Lily's spotlight. Still, the little girl inside me, 10 years old in a suburban Wisconsin kitchen, begging her mom to look up from sewing sequins, never stopped hoping that maybe one day they'd clap for me too. And that hope, it followed me into college, into adulthood, into every decision I made. Even on my wedding day, standing in that white gown, staring at empty seats, I felt it. That same ache of being left behind. But before I tell you how I built a new life outside of their shadows, you need to understand the cost of carrying that emptiness into every room you walk into. By the time I reached high school, I had stopped expecting applause at home. Still, some foolish, stubborn part of me kept trying. I spent nights hunched over my desk, soldering wires for robotics projects or scribbling equations across scrap paper. My room smelled like pencil shavings and burnt circuits, but to me, it was a sanctuary. When I finally won a statewide math and science award during junior year, I told myself, this has to matter. This time, they'll see me. The ceremony was held in a packed auditorium at the University of Wisconsin. I stood on stage with a medal around my neck, cheeks aching from smiling while flashes went off from proud parents in the audience. I scanned the rows, desperate for even one familiar face. There was none. When it ended, I walked out into the cold evening air, clutching my certificate. Everyone else was surrounded by hugs, bouquets, celebratory dinners. I stood alone by the curb until my ride showed up. Our neighbor, Mrs. Harper, who had kindly agreed to drop me off. At home, I placed the medal on the kitchen counter. Dad was on the couch watching sports. Lily sprawled beside him with her phone. "Hey," I began, trying to keep the tremor from my voice. "I won. First place, out of the whole state." Dad didn't look away from the screen. "That's good, Clara. Did you turn off the lights in the garage? They've been running up the bill." I froze. Yeah." Mom's voice floated from the dining room where she was hemming another one of Lily's costumes. "That's wonderful, honey. Don't forget, Lily has a competition this Saturday. We'll need to leave early." Lily grinned, not unkindly, just oblivious. "Mom says if I do well, I might get a scholarship to that arts academy in Chicago." I swallowed hard. "That's great." No one asked to see the medal. The following weekend, Lily didn't win first. She got second place. And yet, my parents threw a party at Olive Garden with extended family invited, balloons tied to the booth. Dad raised his glass, beaming, "To Lily, our shining star." The table clapped. I sipped water, trying to will the tears back. My medal sat untouched in my bedroom drawer. That night, I overheard my parents in the kitchen. Mom whispered, "Clara's so independent. She doesn't need us fussing over her. Lily, she thrives when we encourage her." Independent. That word stung more than they realized. It was their excuse, their way of telling themselves it was fine to forget me. The moment that carved itself deepest into me came a year later, my high school graduation. I had been chosen as valedictorian. I spent weeks writing my speech, imagining my parents' proud faces in the audience. But when the day came, their seats were empty. Afterward, when I finally reached them by phone, Mom said, "We couldn't be in two places at once. Lily's recital was the same day, you understand, right? This was important for her future." I said yes, because that's what I always did. But as I stood in my cap and gown, surrounded by classmates taking pictures with smiling families, I realized something sharp and permanent. I could not compete for their love. From then on, I stopped trying. I called home less often, gave up on telling them about my achievements. I poured myself into preparing for college, into friendships that actually filled me up instead of hollowing me out. Yet even as I hardened my heart, a part of me never stopped aching. The empty bleachers on graduation day became the blueprint for every major milestone afterward, the silent reminder that no matter how high I climbed, the people who were supposed to matter most would always look the other way. And that ache is what I carried with me when I packed my bags for the University of Illinois, telling myself I'd finally learn how to build a life where being invisible wasn't the norm. Leaving Madison for college felt like stepping off a cliff and hoping the air itself would hold me. The day my parents dropped me at University of Illinois, they barely left the car. Dad helped unload 2 suitcases, Mom fussed over Lily's schedule on her phone, and then, just like that, they drove away. No hug that lingered, no teary photo by the dorm entrance. I stood on the curb, clutching my bedding set, watching their car disappear. For a moment, I wondered if they'd even notice when I wasn't around anymore. Inside the residence hall, chaos reigned. Boxes stacked in the hallway, parents arguing over lamps, freshmen laughing nervously. That's when a girl with messy curls and oversized glasses poked her head out of the room across from mine. "You must be Clara," she said, grinning. "I'm Maya Thompson. I already claimed the good corner of our room. Hope you don't mind." Her voice was playful, warm in a way that immediately cracked through my shell. I laughed. "As long as I don't get stuck by the drafty window, we're good." From that moment, something clicked. Maya was studying psychology, and she had this uncanny ability to read a room, or a person, like a book. Within days, she'd memorized my coffee order, dragged me to late-night diner runs, and convinced me that skipping one lecture to sit under the quad trees wasn't the end of the world. What I hadn't expected was how quickly she noticed the shadows I carried. One night, about a month in, we were sprawled on beanbags in our dorm lounge, surrounded by textbooks and empty chip bags. Out of nowhere, Maya asked, "Why do you flinch every time your phone rings with a mom label?" I froze, Dorito halfway to my mouth. "Do I?" She nodded gently. "Yeah, like you're bracing for bad news." It was the first time I told anyone outside my hometown the truth. That my parents had missed my graduation, that Lily's achievements always eclipsed mine, that no matter how hard I tried, I felt invisible. I half expected Maya to give me that awkward smile most people did, the one that said, "Family stuff is messy, let's change the subject." But she didn't. She leaned forward, eyes sharp but soft. "Clara, that's not normal. You deserved better. You still do." Something in me cracked open. Tears I hadn't planned on spilled down my cheeks, and Maya just sat there, holding space for me. No judgment, no impatience, just presence. That was the night I realized friendship could feel like family. Over the next 4 years, Maya became my anchor. When I pulled all-nighters building biomedical models in the lab, she left sticky notes on my desk. "You're a genius. Don't forget to eat." When birthdays passed without a single call from home, she dragged me out for cupcakes with sparklers jammed in the frosting. Meanwhile, my parents' calls grew fewer, their conversations shorter. When they did ring, it was usually to update me on Lily's latest triumph, another lead role, another accolade. I learned to set the phone down on speaker, mute myself, and let their voices blur into background noise. Yet every dismissal cut a little deeper, no matter how much I pretended otherwise. And every time it did, Maya was there, reminding me I wasn't as alone as I felt. Looking back now, it was during those years that I stopped chasing scraps of attention from my parents and started investing in the people who actually showed up. Still, even as I earned scholarships, published research with professors, and graduated with honors, I carried one nagging question. Would any of it ever matter to the people who raised me? That unanswered ache followed me into adulthood, right up until the day I met Daniel Hayes, the man who would finally teach me what unconditional love was supposed to look like. By the time I graduated from the University of Illinois, I had built a life that looked solid from the outside. Research papers, scholarships, a job offer in Chicago. But on the inside, the old wounds still throbbed. No matter how many honors I stacked up, there was always that quiet whisper. Would my parents even care if I told them? It was in that fragile place, balancing between pride and emptiness, that I met Daniel Hayes. Maya had dragged me to a friend's birthday party at a bar in downtown Chicago. The place pulsed with music, lights bouncing off glasses, strangers leaning close to be heard over the DJ. I'd been ready to leave after 20 minutes. I've never been great at loud crowds, but Maya insisted, "Come on, Clara. You've been buried in lab reports for weeks. At least stay for the cake." That's when I noticed him. When, tall, broad-shouldered, leaning against the counter with a pint in hand, Daniel had this kind of laugh that made people turn their heads, not loud, not forced, just warm, genuine, the kind of sound that made you want to hear the joke even if you'd missed the setup. Maya, of course, noticed me noticing. She smirked, tugged me forward, and introduced us. "Daniel, this is Clara. She's the one I told you about, the girl who can fix anything with wires and code." I flushed. "That's an exaggeration. I just work in biomedical engineering." His eyes lit up. "Really? That's incredible. I'm a civil engineer. Bridges, buildings, the less glamorous stuff. We should compare notes sometime. Maybe figure out how to design a hospital that actually makes sense." I laughed, surprised at how easy it felt. He didn't treat my career like a quirky hobby, the way some people did. He spoke to me like what I did mattered. Over the course of the evening, we ended up tucked into a quieter corner, talking about everything from favorite movies to how both of us secretly hated small talk. At one point, he leaned in, voice low. "So, tell me something real, Clara. Not your major, not your job. Something that matters to you." No one had ever asked me that before. I hesitated, then admitted, "I matter-of-factly tell people I don't care what my family thinks. But the truth? I still wish they'd show up for me. Just once." I braced myself for the awkward silence, the quick subject change. Instead, Daniel set down his drink, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "That's not selfish. That's human. Wanting to be loved by your family isn't weakness, Clara. It's your right. And I'm sorry they've made you doubt that." The words hit harder than I expected. My throat tightened. For years, I'd wondered if maybe I was too sensitive, if maybe the problem was me. Daniel shattered that lie with a single sentence. The rest of the night blurred. Laughter, stories, a long walk back to my apartment with the city lights buzzing around us. When we reached my door, he paused. "Can I see you again?" I nodded before my mind could invent reasons to say no. "Yeah, I'd like that." And so it began. Coffee dates that stretched into hours, phone calls that ran past midnight, quiet evenings where I let myself believe I could be fully seen without shrinking first. Looking back, meeting Daniel was the pivot point. For the first time, someone wasn't comparing me to Lily, wasn't treating me like the independent one who didn't need attention. He simply saw me, messy, complicated, brilliant, insecure, and didn't flinch. At the time, I didn't know he'd become my anchor, the person who'd stand by me on the hardest day of my life. All I knew was that, for once, I wasn't invisible. Falling in love with Daniel was like stepping into sunlight after years of living in shadow, but as warm as it felt, The light also exposed wounds I'd buried deep. One evening, about 6 months into our relationship, we were curled up on my couch in Boston, where I had moved for work at a biomedical firm. Daniel had transferred there too, chasing his own career in structural engineering. The city was alive with noise, streetcars rattling, sirens wailing in the distance, but in my apartment, it was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I'd just gotten off the phone with my parents. The call had been short, perfunctory. They'd spent 5 minutes gushing about Lily's latest audition, then ended with, "We'll talk soon," before hanging up. Not once had they asked about my project at work or even how I was doing. Daniel watched me toss the phone onto the coffee table. "They did it again, didn't they?" I forced a smile. "It's fine. I'm used to it." He shook his head. "Clara, listen to yourself. You say it's fine, but your shoulders are tight, your voice drops, and your eyes—" He reached out, brushing a tear I hadn't realized was there. "Your eyes tell the truth. You're not fine." The words stung because they were true. For years, I'd been carrying the weight of that neglect, pretending it didn't matter. But with Daniel's kindness, my defenses began to crack. "Maybe I'm just too sensitive," I whispered. "Maybe it's my fault for wanting more than they can give." Daniel's jaw tightened. "No, that's not your fault. Wanting love and recognition from your family isn't too much. It's the bare minimum. And if they can't give it, you need someone to help you untangle what that's done to you." He said it gently, but firmly. "I think you should talk to someone. A therapist." At first, the idea scared me. Therapy had always sounded like something for people who were broken beyond repair. But the truth? That was how I felt most days. Fractured, like pieces of myself had been scattered and I was too tired to keep picking them up. So, a few weeks later, I found myself sitting in a softly lit office across from Dr. Melissa Grant, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a voice like velvet. The first session, I barely spoke. I told her about my parents' missing graduations, about Lily's spotlight, about the silence that followed my biggest achievements. Dr. Grant listened without rushing me. Then she said words I'll never forget. "Clara, what you've described is a form of emotional neglect. It doesn't leave bruises you can see, but it leaves scars all the same. And you've been carrying those scars alone for too long." Hearing it named out loud was both devastating and liberating. It wasn't that I was weak or dramatic. It was that I had been starved of something essential, and the hunger had shaped me. Week by week, she gave me tools, journaling exercises, breathing techniques. But most importantly, she introduced me to the concept of radical acceptance, the idea that I couldn't change my parents, only my expectations of them. I resisted at first. If I lower my expectations, doesn't that mean I'm giving up on them? "No," Dr. Grant explained. "It means you're giving up the illusion that they'll suddenly become different people. It means protecting yourself from the pain of waiting for something they may never give." That hit hard. For so long, I'd lived on hope that one day they'd clap for me, pick me, love me the way I needed. Letting go of that hope felt like grieving a family I never truly had. There were nights I left her office and cried in the car, forehead pressed against the steering wheel. But slowly, painfully, something shifted. I stopped calling home expecting affection and started calling only when I had the energy to endure the indifference. I stopped measuring my worth by whether my parents were proud and started asking myself if I was proud. Through it all, Daniel stood steady. When I faltered, he reminded me, "You're more than the sum of their neglect. You're brilliant, you're kind, and you're mine." For the first time, I started to believe him. By the time spring rolled around, Daniel had become more than just my boyfriend. He was the safe place I never thought I'd find. But loving him also meant stepping into a part of his life I'd only heard about in stories, his family. "Come home with me this weekend," he said one Friday evening, while we were eating takeout noodles on my apartment floor. "They've been asking about you for months. Besides, Mom already started planning what she's cooking." I hesitated, chopsticks frozen midair. Meeting someone's parents wasn't just casual for me. Family was where I'd always felt most invisible, most unwanted. What if his parents saw me the same way? Daniel reached over, squeezing my hand. "Clara, they're not like that. Trust me." So, that Saturday morning, we packed an overnight bag and drove down I-95 to Providence, Rhode Island, his hometown. The closer we got, the tighter my chest felt. His parents' house was a white colonial with blue shutters, perched on a tree-lined street. As soon as we stepped out of the car, the front door swung open, and a petite woman with auburn hair hurried down the steps. "Danny!" she cried, pulling him into a hug that made my throat ache. Then she turned to me, eyes shining. "And this must be Clara. Sweetheart, I feel like I already know you." Before I could respond, she wrapped me in a hug too. Warm, unreserved, the kind of embrace I'd spent my whole life waiting for. "I'm Ellen," she said, holding me at arm's length to look at me properly. "Welcome to the family." Inside, the house smelled like roasted chicken and herbs. Daniel's father, Robert Hayes, greeted me with a firm handshake and a smile that crinkled his eyes. "I've heard you're the brains behind half the medical breakthroughs coming out of Boston." I laughed nervously. "That's a bit of an exaggeration, but thank you." "Exaggeration or not, we're proud to have you here," he said, ushering us toward the dining room. At dinner, conversation flowed easily. Robert asked thoughtful questions about my research. Ellen kept refilling my glass, insisting I try everything on the table. Daniel's younger sister, Sophie, leaned across the table with a grin. "Finally, someone else to team up with against Danny. He cheats at board games, you know." I found myself laughing, genuinely laughing, in a family setting, something I hadn't done in years. Later that night, as we sat in the living room with coffee and dessert, Ellen turned to me. "Clara, you're part of our family now. And in this family, we celebrate everyone's victories, big or small." Her words caught me off guard. I excused myself to the bathroom, where I closed the door and pressed my back against it. Tears spilled down before I could stop them. It wasn't sadness. It was grief mixing with gratitude. The realization that what I'd longed for my whole life wasn't impossible. It existed, just not where I expected it. A gentle knock came at the door. Daniel's voice. "Clara, you okay?" I opened the door, eyes red. He didn't say anything, just pulled me into his arms. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to explain why I was crying. He already knew. That weekend became a turning point. Every visit after that, the Hayes family welcomed me as if I'd always belonged. Ellen called me on random afternoons just to chat. Robert emailed me articles about scientific breakthroughs he thought I'd enjoy. Sophie texted me memes and inside jokes, until my phone buzzed with more notifications than I'd ever gotten from my own sister. And somewhere between the family dinners, late-night conversations, and laughter that filled their home, I felt a piece of myself begin to heal. I wasn't just Daniel's girlfriend anymore. I was part of something I'd been missing my whole life, a family who saw me. After that first visit to Providence, weekends with the Hayes family became a rhythm in my life. Every time we pulled up to their colonial house, Ellen would already be waiting at the door, Robert ready with a new story or article, Sophie teasing us like we were teenagers. It felt so natural, so different from the cold silence of my own family, that sometimes I forgot it wasn't always mine. One evening, about 2 years into dating, Daniel suggested we go see a film at this small independent theater in Boston, the kind of place that still served popcorn in red-striped bags and had velvet seats that squeaked when you sat down. I didn't think much of it. Daniel knew I loved quiet, intimate places more than flashy restaurants. We bought tickets, found our seats, and settled in with the smell of buttered popcorn hanging in the air. Halfway through the previews, the screen flickered, and suddenly, the movie stopped. Confused murmurs rippled through the audience. Then a new video began playing. At first, I thought it was another trailer, but then I saw myself, a blurry photo of me from freshman year, hair messy, eyes wide behind glasses. The crowd chuckled. The next clip was me laughing with Maya in our dorm lounge, then snapshots of me and Daniel, our first coffee date, a goofy selfie at Navy Pier, us dancing in the kitchen of my Boston apartment. My breath caught. Music swelled. The same song we had joked was ours because it always seemed to play when we were together. I turned to Daniel, but he wasn't in his seat. He was already walking down the aisle. The video ended on the words, "Clara, will you marry me?" The theater lights rose slightly, and there he was, kneeling in front of me, a small box in his hand. His voice trembled just enough to make it real. "Clara Reynolds, you are the strongest, kindest, most brilliant woman I have ever known. You've taught me that love isn't about grand gestures, it's about showing up every single day. And I want to keep showing up, for you, for us, for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" The room blurred with tears. My chest ached with all the moments I'd been overlooked. And here was this man, promising I'd never be invisible again. "Yes," I whispered, then louder, "Yes!" The theater erupted in applause. Strangers cheered, some wiping their own eyes. Daniel slid the ring onto my finger, a simple, elegant diamond. Nothing flashy, exactly what I would have chosen myself. Then he stood and pulled me into his arms, the audience clapping like they'd just watched the ending of the best love story ever written. That night, back in our apartment, we toasted with cheap champagne he'd hidden in the fridge. I couldn't stop staring at the ring, how it caught the kitchen light. "They're going to be happy for you," Daniel said softly, though there was hesitation in his eyes. He meant my parents. I wanted to believe him. I wanted so badly to think that for once, my happiness would be enough to draw them in, to make them show up. But deep down, I felt that familiar chill of doubt. Still, I called them the next morning. My mother answered after 4 rings. "Hi, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have some news. Daniel proposed last night, and I said yes." There was a pause, a beat too long, then flatly, "Oh, that's good. Congratulations." I swallowed the sting. "We're thinking about a spring wedding, maybe 6 months from now." "That's quite soon," she replied. "Well, let us know the details when you have them." And then, as if she couldn't help herself, she added, "Oh, did I tell you? Lily just landed the lead in her theater production. We're so thrilled for her." My hand clenched around the phone. My engagement had just been brushed aside like small talk, replaced once again by my sister's spotlight. "Right," I murmured. "That's great for her." When I hung up, Daniel wrapped me in his arms without me saying a word. He knew, he always knew. And as I rested my head against his chest, I promised myself something. No matter how lukewarm their reaction, I was going to celebrate this love, because it deserved to be celebrated, fully, loudly, joyfully. Even if my family never clapped for me, Daniel always would. The morning after the proposal, I woke up with sunlight hitting the diamond on my finger, scattering tiny rainbows across the ceiling. For a moment, I let myself believe that everything was perfect, that the love I had found would erase the shadows of my past. But as the weeks turned into months and wedding planning took over, those shadows crept back in. Daniel's family jumped in with open arms. Ellen called almost daily with suggestions, venues, florists, even a baker she swore by. Robert offered to handle the rehearsal dinner. Sophie insisted on being my unofficial maid of honor, making Pinterest boards full of color schemes and dress ideas. It felt like the wedding wasn't just mine and Daniel's. It was theirs too, a celebration of welcoming me into their circle. Meanwhile, my own family's involvement was minimal. My mother's only real comment came in a text. "Let us know what you decide about seating charts." My father said little beyond a mumbled, "Just keep it reasonable." And Lily, my golden sister, sent one breezy email saying she'd try to be there, depending on her theater schedule. Daniel noticed the silence, of course. One evening, as we sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by magazines and catering menus, he asked softly, "Does it bother you that they aren't more involved?" I hesitated, flipping through a bridal spread I wasn't even seeing. Bother me? No. Surprise me? Not really. He set the papers aside, looking straight at me. "Clara, you deserve more than indifference. You deserve the same excitement my family feels." I smiled weakly, because what could I say? I'd spent my whole life learning not to expect that kind of excitement from them. Still, there were bright spots. Dress shopping with Sophie turned into a day full of laughter, trying on gowns that ranged from classic elegance to absurd, tulle-filled monstrosities. Ellen teared up when she saw me in a simple ivory dress with lace sleeves. "You look radiant," she whispered, squeezing my hand. Later that night, I stared at myself in the mirror, the ghost of that gown still on my skin. For the first time, I pictured walking down an aisle where people actually wanted to see me, where love wouldn't be conditional. But then came the guest list. Sitting at the kitchen table, I stared at the names. My parents, my sister, a scattering of relatives who'd always treated me like background noise. The thought of them sitting stone-faced while Daniel's family cheered nearly made me sick. "Maybe we should keep it small," I suggested carefully. "Something intimate, just close friends and your family." Daniel frowned. "Clara, are you sure? This is your wedding too." I swallowed hard. I don't want their coldness to stain the day. I'd rather it be filled with people who actually want to celebrate with us. He reached across the table, covering my hand with his. "Then that's what we'll do. Our wedding, our rules." Even so, guilt lingered. At night, I'd lie awake wondering if I was betraying some unspoken duty as a daughter by not fighting harder to pull them in. But every time I replayed my mother's flat tone, my father's silence, Lily's dismissiveness, the guilt faded, replaced by something sharper. Determination. I wasn't going to let them steal this joy from me. The final straw came when my mother called 2 weeks before the wedding. "Your father and I might have to arrive late," she said matter-of-factly. "Lily has a matinee and we'd like to support her." I nearly dropped the phone. "You're telling me you might miss my ceremony because of Lily's play?" Her sigh crackled through the line. "You know how important her performances are. Don't make this into a competition, Clara." I hung up before the anger could spill out. When Daniel found me pacing, tears burning down my face, I blurted out the truth. "They'll never choose me, not even on my wedding day." He pulled me close, his voice steady in my ear. "Then we choose each other. That's what matters." And for the first time in my life, I realized maybe family wasn't the one you were born into. Maybe it was the one you built, one choice at a time. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and bright, sunlight pouring through the stained glass windows of the small chapel in Providence. The air hummed with anticipation. Ellen fluttered about adjusting flowers, Sophie was snapping candid photos, and Robert kept Daniel distracted with calm words. I stood in the bridal room, veil pinned, hands trembling. My reflection in the mirror didn't look like the invisible girl who grew up in Chicago. For once, I felt radiant, worthy. But beneath the satin and lace, my heart thudded with one gnawing question. Would they even come? The ceremony was set to begin at 2. By 1:30, no sign of my parents. By 1:45, still nothing. Daniel's family filled the pews, friends from college and work laughed softly, waiting. An empty space remained near the front, a cruel reminder. At 1:55, the chapel doors opened. My mother walked in briskly, my father trailing, both avoiding my gaze. And then Lily appeared, heels clicking, curls bouncing, wearing a white dress. White. My stomach dropped. Guests whispered, heads turning. It wasn't bridal white, but close enough to sting like a slap. She gave a little wave, soaking up the attention as if she were the star of the show. Ellen's mouth tightened. Sophie muttered under her breath, "Unbelievable." I forced a smile, though my throat was dry. Not today. I won't let her ruin this day. But Lily wasn't finished. As the music began and Daniel took his place at the altar, I stepped into the aisle, every step a battle between joy and dread. My parents didn't even rise when I passed. They sat stiff, eyes darting to Lily, who looked smug, like she owned the moment. The ceremony began. The pastor spoke of love, of commitment, of 2 lives intertwining. Daniel squeezed my hand, grounding me. For a moment, I breathed again. Then came the part where he asked if anyone had reason to object. The room was still, until a voice rang out. "I just don't think this is a good idea." It was Lily. Gasps rippled through the chapel. I froze, blood rushing to my ears. She stood up, all eyes on her. "I mean, come on. Clara's always been, well, dramatic. Do you really think she's ready for marriage? I love her, I do. But let's be honest, She's not exactly stable. My chest constricted. Murmurs filled the pews. Daniel's jaw tightened, his eyes burning with fury. "Lily," I whispered, voice breaking. "Please, sit down." She shook her head, almost pitying. "I just don't want you making a mistake, Daniel. You deserve someone who's not carrying around baggage." Tears blurred my vision. In that moment, every insecurity I'd carried, every dismissal, every time I'd been overlooked, crashed over me like a tidal wave. But Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady, ringing through the chapel. "You're wrong." The room fell silent. He looked at Lily, unflinching. "Clara is the strongest person I've ever met. The fact that she has scars doesn't make her weak. It makes her extraordinary, and the only mistake I could ever make is not marrying her." Applause broke out from his family, from friends, even from strangers. I stood trembling, but when Daniel turned back to me, his eyes soft with love, I felt the ground steady beneath my feet. The pastor, after a long pause, cleared his throat and continued. My hands shook as I repeated my vows, but I meant every word with my whole being. By the time Daniel kissed me, sealing our promises, I wasn't thinking of Lily's interruption or my parents' cold stares. I was thinking of us, two souls who had chosen each other despite everything. And as the cheers filled the chapel, one thought burned bright in my chest. They could try to silence me, overshadow me, even humiliate me, but I would not be erased. The rehearsal dinner was over, the laughter and clinking glasses fading into memory as the evening settled into silence. Daniel's family had hugged me warmly, his mother whispering, "Tomorrow, you'll officially be one of us." But back at the small inn where I was staying, the quiet pressed in heavy. The old wooden beams creaked with every step, and the scent of lavender from the sachet on the nightstand did little to calm my racing thoughts. I sat at the edge of the bed, veil hanging from the chair across the room, glowing pale in the lamplight. Tomorrow I'd walk down the aisle. Tomorrow I'd say, "I do." Yet sleep felt impossible. A knock broke the silence. It was Sophie, holding 2 mugs of chamomile tea. "I knew you'd still be awake," she said softly, slipping inside. She kicked off her shoes and curled up beside me like we were back in our college dorm. "You look terrified," she added, her voice gentle but honest. "I am," I admitted. My throat tightened. Not about marrying Daniel, about everything else. My parents, Lily, what if they don't show? What if they do and ruin it? I can't shake the feeling something will go wrong. Sophie handed me a mug. "You've already survived worse than their disapproval. If they act out, that's on them, not you." I sipped, the tea warm but my stomach still churning. "It's not that simple. My whole life I've wanted them to see me, to actually see me. Tomorrow should be the day they finally do." She put an arm around my shoulders. "Clara, they may never give you what you want, but Daniel does. We do. That's what matters." Her words sank in, but the ache didn't fade. "I don't know if I can walk down that aisle with them staring at me like I'm a mistake." Sophie squeezed tighter. "Then don't walk for them. Walk for yourself. Walk for Daniel." A tear slipped down my cheek, hot and uninvited. Sophie brushed it away with her thumb, like she'd done 100 times before. "Promise me something," she whispered. "Promise that no matter what happens tomorrow, you won't let them steal your joy." I nodded slowly. "I promise." Later, after Sophie left, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the lavender sachet clutched in my hand. My mind replayed every moment. My father dismissing my awards, my mother fussing over Lily, the nights I cried alone while they praised her. And yet, layered over those memories was Daniel's steady voice, the way he looked at me like I was more than enough. I closed my eyes, breathing in and out, trying to hold on to that truth. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "Can't sleep. Just wanted to say, tomorrow is the luckiest day of my life." My heart softened. I typed back, "Mine too." But when I set the phone down, unease returned like a shadow. Somewhere deep inside, I knew Lily wouldn't let tomorrow pass quietly. She never could. I whispered into the dark, as if the walls could hear me. Please, just let it be our day. The night stretched long and restless, every creak of the inn a reminder of what was at stake. By the time dawn's first light touched the curtains, I hadn't slept at all. And yet, as the morning came, so did a fragile resolve. I would walk down that aisle, no matter what waited on the other side. The morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and golden, yet it felt far too sharp against my sleepless eyes. I sat in front of the vanity mirror, hair pinned into curls, the lace of my dress draped across my shoulders like fragile armor, my stomach twisted with nerves, though Sophie kept chattering beside me, trying to distract me. "You look like something out of a bridal magazine," she said, fastening my earrings. "Daniel's going to lose his breath when he sees you." I forced a smile, but my reflection betrayed me. The tightness around my mouth, the faint tremor in my hands. I could still hear my own whisper from last night. Please, just let it be our day. When the church bells began to ring, reality settled over me. Guests filled the pews, the organist played softly, and whispers floated through the air like tiny secrets. I peeked from behind the door as Sophie adjusted my veil. That's when I saw them. My parents. Sitting perfectly composed in the third row, their expressions unreadable, and beside them, Lily, my sister, radiant in a crimson dress that seemed chosen to draw every eye. My chest tightened. Sophie noticed the way my face paled. "Hey," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "Ignore them. This is about you and Daniel. Only you two." I nodded, though my throat felt dry. The doors opened, and the aisle stretched before me like a test I'd waited my whole life to face. Every step echoed louder than the organ. I tried to steady my breath, but as I drew closer, my gaze kept sliding toward my family. My mother's lips pressed thin. My father's eyes slid away. And Lily, she smirked, as if the whole thing were a show she already knew the ending to. But then my eyes met Daniel's. Standing at the altar, hands clasped, eyes fixed on me with that unwavering warmth that had carried me through the darkest nights. For the first time that morning, my heartbeat steadied. When I reached him, he leaned in just enough to whisper, "You're breathtaking." I exhaled a shaky laugh. "You don't look too bad yourself." The ceremony began. The pastor's words floated around me, but I clung to Daniel's hand like an anchor. Still out of the corner of my eye, I caught Lily shifting in her seat, her expression sly. Every instinct screamed that she wasn't here to support me. She was here to make her presence felt. As the vows approached, the tension inside me swelled. Daniel spoke first, his voice steady, eyes never leaving mine. "I choose you, Clara. Not just today, but every day. Through every storm, every joy, every shadow. You're my home." Tears blurred my vision, but they weren't just from love. They were from fear that somehow, someone would try to tear this moment from me. When it was my turn, my voice trembled. "Daniel, you've given me what I never thought I'd have. A place where I belong, a love that sees me. Today I choose you, and I'll keep choosing you, no matter what tries to stand in our way." The words were truer than I expected. The pastor smiled, lifting his hand. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Applause filled the church as Daniel kissed me, the world narrowing to the warmth of his lips and the strength of his embrace. For a moment, nothing else existed, not my parents, not Lily, not the years of hurt. But as we turned to walk back down the aisle, hand in hand, I saw Lily rise from her seat. Her eyes met mine, a gleam of challenge burning in them. The smile on her face wasn't one of joy. It was the smile of someone who knew she was holding onto a secret. My stomach dropped. The day wasn't over. The storm hadn't passed. And deep inside, I knew the real test was only just beginning. The reception hall glowed with golden light, strings of fairy bulbs draped across the ceiling like constellations. Laughter and clinking glasses filled the room, but inside me, the unease hadn't lifted. Daniel's hand was warm in mine as we circled the tables, thanking guests, smiling for photos, but every so often I caught Lily's eyes following me, always watching, always calculating. By the time dinner was served, I was exhausted from pretending. Sophie leaned toward me with a teasing grin. "Relax, Mrs. Cole," she whispered, bumping my shoulder. "This is your moment. Nothing can ruin today." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to drown in the joy, the music, the taste of champagne. But then, as the band struck up the first notes of our dance, my phone buzzed inside my clutch. I shouldn't have looked. Not in that moment. Not in front of Daniel. But the vibration rattled through me like an omen. Slipping it open beneath the table, I froze. One text, one sentence, from an unknown number. "Ask your groom about Lily before you sign the papers tonight." My breath caught. The words burned into me, stealing all sound from the room. Around me, applause rang out as Daniel took my hand to lead me to the dance floor. I tried to smile, but the edges of my vision blurred. I tucked the phone away quickly, but Sophie noticed the way my fingers shook. "You okay?" she mouthed. I nodded too quickly. "Fine." Daniel wrapped his arm around me as the music swelled. "Don't look so nervous," he teased softly, forehead brushing mine. "It's just us now." But the message echoed in my head, pounding louder than the violins. Ask your groom about Lily. Every instinct warred inside me. Should I confront him here, now, in front of everyone? Or wait, let the night unravel a little longer and see what shadows emerged? As we swayed, I forced myself to look at him. His eyes were tender, his smile genuine, and yet, could it all be a mask? My chest tightened as Lily's laughter drifted across the room, sharp and deliberate, like she knew something I didn't. When the song ended, applause thundered again. Daniel kissed my temple and whispered, "You're glowing." If only he knew how pale my heart felt. I excused myself under the pretense of freshening up and slipped into the hallway, clutching my phone like it was poison. I read the message again, as if the words might change. They didn't. "Who sent this?" I whispered to myself, leaning against the cool wall. My pulse hammered. Was it Lily, or someone trying to protect me from her? The bathroom door opened and Sophie stepped out, arms crossed. "Clara, talk to me. You looked like you saw a ghost out there." I hesitated, then handed her the phone. Her eyes widened as she read. "Oh my God, what does this mean?" "I don't know," my voice cracked. "But I can't let this ruin everything. Not tonight." Sophie's gaze sharpened. "Or maybe you can't let yourself ignore it. What if it's true?" Her words hit like a blade. I shook my head, tears pricking my eyes. "Daniel wouldn't, he couldn't." But even as I said it, doubt gnawed at me. The door to the hall creaked, and I quickly pocketed my phone as Daniel stepped into the corridor, searching. "There you are," he said, smiling gently. "Everyone's asking for you." His eyes flicked to Sophie, then back to me. "Everything okay?" I forced my lips into a curve. "Yes." Just needed a minute. He reached for my hand, steady and sure, but the phone buzzed again against my palm. Another message, this time just 3 words. "He's lying. Tonight." My heart stopped. The world, my wedding, the man I had just promised forever to, it all teetered in that moment like glass about to shatter. The second message still pulsed on my phone screen like a heartbeat I couldn't control. "He's lying. Tonight." I slipped it back into my clutch, just as Daniel's fingers laced through mine, his warmth steady against the storm rising inside me. The ballroom roared behind us with clinking glasses and laughter. But here in the hallway, it felt like the air itself held its breath. Sophie's eyes darted between us, her lips pressed tight. "Clara," she whispered urgently, "don't let this go." "You need to—" Daniel tilted his head, suspicion flickering. "Need to what?" I forced a laugh, brittle as glass. "She's just reminding me not to skip dessert." He smiled, but his gaze lingered, heavy. "Good, because the cake is waiting, and everyone is waiting for us." He kissed my cheek lightly, then stepped back toward the hall, his posture all charm, all confidence. The moment he disappeared, Sophie grabbed my wrist. "You can't ignore this anymore. If there's something between Daniel and Lily—" I cut her off, my throat tight. "No, not tonight. Not here." But even as I said it, I felt like I was standing on a cliff's edge, the ground already crumbling. We returned to the hall. The crowd erupted into cheers when we reappeared. Daniel raised our joined hands like a victory flag. I smiled automatically, but my heart thudded against my ribs. Then Lily stood. Her emerald dress shimmered under the lights, her smile sharp enough to cut. She lifted her champagne glass and tapped it with her spoon. The room hushed instantly. "To the bride and groom," she began, voice smooth as silk. "To Clara, radiant and brave, and to Daniel, dependable, loyal Daniel." She let the word loyal linger, the corners of her lips curling. A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the guests. Daniel shifted beside me, his smile stiffening. Lily continued, her eyes locked on mine. "You know, weddings are about truth, about starting fresh, with nothing hidden. Isn't that right, Daniel?" Gasps rose from the crowd. My hand went cold in his. He tried to pull me closer, whispering through clenched teeth, "She's drunk. Ignore her." But Lily wasn't drunk. Her gaze was too sharp, her words too measured. She pulled out her phone, waving it casually. "Should I share the messages, or would you like to, Daniel?" The room fell silent. Every eye turned to us. "What messages?" I asked, my voice breaking the hush. Daniel's grip on me tightened. "Clara, please." But Lily had already tapped her screen. A photo flashed across the projector, sent from her phone to the AV system. The crowd gasped as a series of late-night texts lit up the wall. Messages from Daniel, words that couldn't be misread. "I can't stop thinking about you. Just one more night before it ends. She doesn't have to know." The blood drained from my face. My ears roared, drowning out the whispers spreading like wildfire. Daniel stumbled forward. "It's not what it looks like." Lily raised her glass again. "Oh, but it's exactly what it looks like." The world tilted. My knees weakened, but Sophie was at my side, gripping my arm. I searched Daniel's face, desperate for denial, for anger, for anything that could undo what I'd just seen. But all I saw was panic, guilt. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered, "Tell me it's not true." Daniel reached for me, but I stepped back. The distance between us felt like an ocean. "It was a mistake," he stammered. "I thought it was over, Clara. It meant nothing." The guests erupted into shocked murmurs. Somewhere a woman gasped loudly. Someone dropped their fork. But Lily only smiled, victorious. "Congratulations, Clara. You married a man who still belonged to me." And in that moment, beneath the glittering chandeliers and the sound of my world collapsing, I realized the truth wasn't just revealed. It had been paraded, celebrated, burned into the memory of everyone I loved. The fairy tale I'd built crumbled in front of the entire room. The ballroom was chaos. Guests whispered, some clutching their pearls as though betrayal could be contagious. The projection screen still glowed faintly with Daniel's words, damning and undeniable. My throat burned, but I forced myself to walk, heel after heel, out of the hall. Behind me, I heard chairs scrape, a voice calling my name. "Daniel." "Clara, wait!" I didn't. Not until I found a quiet corridor outside, away from the eyes, away from the humiliation. My reflection in the tall window looked pale, almost unrecognizable, a bride stripped of her fairy tale in less than a breath. Daniel caught up, panting. His tie hung loose, his perfect image crumbling. "Clara, please let me explain." I spun, the words sharper than I meant. "Explain what? That you promised forever while sending her messages in the dark?" His jaw tightened. "It wasn't what it looked like. It was weakness, a mistake. I ended it before the wedding, I swear." "Before the wedding?" My laugh came out hollow. "That's supposed to comfort me? That you stopped betraying me just in time to say your vows?" Before he could answer, footsteps clicked on the marble floor. Lily emerged, calm as if she owned the scene. Her green dress caught the light, mocking in its elegance. "Well," she drawled, "isn't this cozy?" The happy couple, finally discussing honesty. Daniel's face twisted. "Lily, leave." But she didn't. She leaned against the wall, arms folded, enjoying every fracture spreading between us. "Don't blame me, Daniel. You're the one who couldn't stay away." "Shut up!" His voice cracked, desperate. I stared at them, my heart pounding. "How long?" I asked, softer now, almost pleading. "How long has this been going on?" Daniel swallowed hard. He didn't answer fast enough. Lily smiled for him. "Since before the engagement. I suppose you could say he practiced his vows with me first." The hallway blurred. My hands trembled, but I refused to let her see me break. Daniel stepped closer. "She's twisting it, Clara. Yes, it happened, but it was over. I swear. I chose you. I married you." "Married me?" I whispered, heat rushing to my face. "Or caged me? Did you think I'd never find out?" His hands reached for mine, but I pulled back like his touch was fire. "Clara, I love you," he begged. "I was stupid. I was lonely. It didn't mean anything." Lily let out a short laugh. "Didn't mean anything? You begged me not to end it. You said you couldn't breathe without me." "Stop!" Daniel roared, turning on her, but the damage was already done. Tears blurred my vision, but anger cut through them. "Both of you, stop. Do you realize what you've done? You didn't just humiliate me, you made a mockery of everything I believed in." Daniel's face collapsed, all his polish gone. "Please, Clara, don't let this end us. I'll fix it. I'll prove it to you." But I didn't believe him. Not anymore. The truth had already been spoken, carved into me like stone. I straightened, wiping my cheeks. My voice shook, but it carried. "You two deserve each other, and I deserve better than either of you." Silence fell. Daniel's eyes widened, panicked. Lily's smirk faltered, just slightly. I turned away, walking down the corridor, each step heavier but steadier than the last. Behind me, I heard Daniel's voice breaking, calling after me. I didn't turn back, not once, because for the first time that night, I wasn't running away from the wreckage. I was walking toward my own survival. 6 months is long enough for wounds to scar, but not long enough to forget the sting. I stood in front of the mirror in my small but sunlit apartment, fastening a pair of pearl earrings I'd bought myself. No gifts, no borrowed promises, just me choosing what I wanted. My reflection was sharper now, stronger. The haunted look I carried on my wedding night had faded, replaced by something steadier, fiercer. Seattle's skyline stretched behind me through the window, the Space Needle rising like a quiet reminder that life keeps moving whether you're ready or not. A knock at the door pulled me out of my thoughts. "Clara, you ready?" It was Maya, my best friend since college, who had refused to let me drown in grief. She stepped inside without waiting for an answer, holding 2 coffees. "You look amazing," she said, handing me one. "Power suit, pearls. If Daniel saw you now, he'd choke on his own regret." I laughed, a sound that felt good in my chest. That's not the goal, but if it happens, I won't complain. The truth was, Daniel had tried. Calls, emails, even letters. I never replied. Divorce papers were signed 3 months ago. His family's empire had been rocked by scandals of their own. Lily had vanished from the society pages as quickly as she'd appeared. But me? I was still here, still standing. "Are you nervous?" Maya asked as we walked toward the elevator. "A little," I admitted. "Today isn't just another meeting, it's proof that I survived. That I'm not defined by what they did to me." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and we stepped out into the bustling lobby. I had been offered a position at a new marketing agency, one that valued resilience as much as skill. It wasn't just a job, it was a chance to rebuild my name outside the shadow of Daniel's world. As we exited onto the street, Maya nudged me. "And after work, we're celebrating." "No excuses." "Celebrating what?" I asked, half smiling. "Celebrating you. 6 months ago, you were broken. Look at you now. You're fireproof." Her words landed deep. I remembered that night, the cold marble under my heels, Daniel's desperate pleas, Lily's smug smile, and then me walking away. That choice had saved me. We reached the cafe across the street where a few colleagues were waiting to welcome me, the aroma of fresh coffee mixed with laughter spilling out the door. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like an outsider in my own life. Inside, one of the managers, Alex, greeted me warmly. "Clara, glad you're here. Everyone's excited to have you on board." "Thank you," I said, shaking his hand. My voice didn't tremble. Over the clinking of mugs and casual chatter, I felt something shift inside me. This was more than moving forward. It was reclaiming my story. Maya leaned close and whispered, "Told you. This is your chapter now." I nodded, letting the warmth of belonging settle in. "Yeah," I said softly, "and I'm writing it on my own terms." The clatter of cups, the low hum of conversation, the Seattle drizzle tapping against the windows, all of it blended into a background symphony of renewal. For the first time in months, I wasn't looking back. I was already facing forward. The cafe meeting had wrapped up hours ago, yet my heart was still humming with the strange, unfamiliar rhythm of possibility. The city had slipped into its evening glow, the streets glittering with wet reflections, neon signs blinking alive, and a cool breeze carrying the scent of rain-soaked pavement. I walked home alone, clutching the folder of documents my new team had given me. 6 months ago, I thought I'd never carry anything heavier than the weight of betrayal. Now, this folder felt like a promise, a doorway to a future I had chosen, not one handed down by Daniel's family name. When I reached my apartment, I lit a single candle on the table. Not out of ritual, but because the soft light felt like a small celebration. My phone buzzed, another email from Daniel. I didn't even open it this time. I slid it into the drawer and turned the key. That chapter was closed. A knock came at the door. It was Maya again, holding takeout bags that smelled like garlic and butter. "Don't you dare spend your first day of freedom eating cereal," she teased. We ate on the couch, cross-legged, like we used to in our 20s. Between bites of pasta, she asked, "So what now? What's next for Clara, the Phoenix?" I smiled at her nickname. "I think I'm done surviving. It's time to start living. Maybe I'll travel. Or maybe I'll just pour myself into this job and build something that's truly mine." Maya clinked her plastic fork against mine. "To living, then?" Later that night, when the dishes were cleared and the apartment was quiet, I sat by the window with a journal. My pen moved without hesitation. I wrote about courage, about betrayal, about how healing isn't a straight line but a mosaic, broken pieces fitted back together into something unexpectedly beautiful. And then I wrote a letter to myself. "You are not the girl who begged him to stay. You are not the bride who walked away from her own wedding. You are the woman who chose herself even when it hurt like hell. And that choice will keep saving you." As the ink dried, I realized something. Revenge was never the real victory. Freedom was. The city outside pulsed with life, cars weaving through wet streets, strangers chasing their own stories. I closed the journal and whispered to the empty room, "I'm ready." If there's one truth I've learned through all of this, it's that life doesn't break us in the ways we expect. It breaks us where we're most fragile, then dares us to rebuild stronger. I thought my worth depended on being loved, on being chosen. But betrayal taught me something far more valuable. The most powerful choice is the one you make for yourself. Healing isn't neat. It isn't fast. Some days you'll wake up still bleeding from the same old wounds. But with every step forward, you teach yourself resilience. And resilience isn't about pretending you're unhurt. It's about carrying your scars like proof that you survived. Daniel and Lily? They were storms that passed. What remained was me. And I've learned that sometimes the ending you fear most becomes the doorway to the life you were meant to live. So if you're watching this, let my story remind you. You are stronger than the betrayal, stronger than the loss, stronger than the silence that follows heartbreak. Don't wait for someone else to save you. Save yourself. And if my journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, share this story, and leave a comment below. Let's keep building this circle of truth and strength together.